Values across generations. I'm Lisa Parker, president of the Lawrence Welk Family Foundation and vice president of Philanthropic Services for Whittier Trust. Our foundation is now in the 4th generation, and I am obsessed with the topic of how we engage multiple generations in philanthropy. When Jim Ferris invited me to moderate this session, he said, why don't you get the people you would most want to hear from in a room about this topic? And fortunately, they all said yes. So this is my dream team. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. I was going to tell you all to turn off your cell phones, and that's very indicative of my generation. However, our guest Emily Davis pointed out that people might want to tweet. So if you are planning to tweet, please turn your ringer off. The other thing I just wanted to say is that this is an incredible brain trust of practical wisdom and experience. Think for a moment about what brought you to this session and what you'd most like to get out of it, because you have the opportunity, both with the panel and I will say with some of the faces in the audience, to delve deeply into those questions. So without further ado, I will introduce our panel. And also indicative of my generation is that I need notes. So I'm going to introduce them, and then they'll each take 5 to 7 minutes to talk about their relationship to this topic. First off is Susan Price. I am just incredibly humbled by each and every one of these people. Susan is the author of 6 books, including The Giving Family, Raising Our Kids to Help Others, which was a tremendously influential book to me and our family. She was the vice president of the National Center for Family Philanthropy for 4 years. She travels the country speaking about instilling philanthropic values in the next generation. And not only does she travel the country, she travels the airways, having been on Oprah. You may have some.
That's all I got.
You'll have some tips from me about moderating and asking questions after this, and the Today Show. So appreciation to you for making the trip out here to be with us. To her right is Emily Davis, also an author. Last year, Wiley published her book, Fundraising and the Next Generation. She has her own consulting firm, training around leadership development, philanthropy, and social media. To her right is Lana Volftsun. Lana is the executive director of the 1% Foundation in San Francisco, which empowers young professionals to be philanthropists by giving 1% of their income and working collaboratively to fund organizations they care about. She also has an incredible personal story, which she'll share with us. And to her right is Katherine Lorenz. When I read Katherine's biography, I just about turned over. Forbes named her one of the ones to watch, an up-and-coming face in philanthropy, as opposed to the old and ragged face. I'm in the next month's issue. So Katherine was with the Institute for Philanthropy, which promotes effective philanthropy in the UK and internationally, before she took over as president of the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, her family's foundation. She also has an extraordinary background and a commitment to indigenous populations, and I know she'll share that story. I don't want to steal your thunder. Mm-hmm. But just to give some framing to this conversation, why we're talking about the transfer of values, for the first time, there are 3 and 4 generations sitting around the board table of our family foundations. And it used to be a conversation, and still rightly so is, about passing on a legacy. But we're living longer, and we're staying active longer. And so it's about navigating the transition of values, where they intersect and where they don't, so that we can be effective together in our collective work. But Susan, I think you're the perfect person to kind of paint a picture for us about why the transfer of values is such a critical piece to focus on.
And before I do, I want to just brag on your foundation for a second, because some years ago, the National Center for Family Philanthropy did some research and a paper on the next generation boards that family foundations were creating, and these were for children, not for young adults. And the farthest back they could go, the first example they could find was the one that Shirley Fredricks created at the Lorenz Foundation and trained Lisa, little kid, and her siblings and cousins. So these people have more history on understanding the issues about passing on the legacy, because here you are still doing it. And I think it's obvious that a lot of people have created family philanthropies in part because they want to pass on the family's legacy of philanthropy, and they want to see their next generations be able to carry on their work. Some of you are probably old enough to remember the old game telephone. You remember that? But for you younger people who only text, I will explain that you sat in a circle, a bunch of children, and one person would start with, a phrase and whisper it to the next person, and you keep whispering it all the way around the circle till you got to the last person, who would reveal what it was. And inevitably, it would start, and the person would think, okay, hot dog. And by the time it got around to the last person, it would come out like hairball. And so it always struck me that there's a lot of difficulty in communicating, especially when you're very, very quiet. And one of the things that I've seen with family foundations is, yes, they want to convey the values to the next generation. They just haven't really talked about it very much or articulated it in any real fashion that could be then carried on. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is help families talk about it, record it, do histories, do a million things that you can do to express yourselves. And I realize how important it is, because I think about a family foundation that I know in the Midwest where, and it was pretty typical, father and mother start a family foundation, dad eventually dies, mom is now in charge of the foundation with her 2 daughters. And the daughters keep saying, Mom, tell us what you want us to do when you're gone. We've got to figure out how to plan for our next steps. And the mom kept saying, don't worry, kids, you'll know when the time comes what I would have wanted. You'll know. So then she dies. And of course, they believe they do know. And then they got into a huge battle that almost split the foundation, because each daughter had a different view of what mom would have wanted on a couple of key issues, one of which was also very typical. The money is made in a little community in Ohio. Do we leave all the grant making in that one community, or is mom okay with us giving it out into some of the communities where we're now active, the rest of our family members? And one said, no, mom would not have wanted that, and the other said, absolutely, mom would have been cool with that, and mom's not there to speak anymore. And it almost split the foundation because each of them thought they were right, and they were. It's just that each individual has a different relationship with their sibling, with their parent, than their sibling does. So you're speaking from your own personal experience, and so neither one of them were wrong. They just, they looked at things differently because of what they remembered. So fortunately, they were able to get some good help and mediation and got over that hump, and they exist. But I think I just want to throw out like 3 quick ideas, and then we can follow up with some more thoughts later. Because I really think it's important that we get real intentional about what our values are going to be down the road, and to articulate those. And so I think you can start with the question, is there something we share that makes this a family philanthropy? Because otherwise, if we're all sitting around together, our younger generations, the older generations, and we're just doing our own thing, then we're doing philanthropy, but we're not doing it as a family. So what is it that we share? And one of the things that family foundations have quickly come to realize is it is so much easier to figure out what our differences are than what our common shared values are. I'm human, that happens in my family, but when you've got a bunch of people together in a family, and you've got older generation and younger generation, you've got people who live in different geographic areas, people who have completely different political views, people who have different personal interests, doing things like philanthropy can be more challenging. And so I always think it's important that families look to what they have in common rather than what their differences are. And while that seems kind of obvious, it's something that can sometimes take real work and digging deeper and having really interesting and specific conversations, maybe around the Thanksgiving table, about what is it that we have in common that makes this a family philanthropy. And when people don't know each other very well, or they live all over the country, or they're cousins that are barely, knowing each other, for a lot of them, it's just the pleasure of getting together and having that shared experience as a family. So, that's enough to sustain a foundation. Point 2 is a slightly related one, because I do think it's important that we cultivate a strong sense of our history and our family and our traditions and so forth. But we also have to welcome the fresh perspectives of the younger generation as they come on board. I have this little printout because I know I wouldn't be able to memorize it, but I always was fascinated by John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s approach to this. He knew what his values were that he wanted to pass down, and he carved them on the wall at Rockefeller Plaza. So whenever I go there, I think, holy cow, I totally know what he wanted, and it's very inspiring. It's every right implies a responsibility, every opportunity an obligation, every possession a duty. So now we're several generations down the road, and some years ago, I think it was the 4th generation of the Rockefeller family got together and decided, okay, that works for us, but we should brainstorm some more because we are now a much bigger group and we've got a lot of values. And so they came up with a much bigger list, and it included other shared values like nurture the family through the generations, provide safe environments for open dialogue, respect diversity, think long-term, and serve effectively within your community. And so as we bring the younger generation on, it's not like us handing the legacy down from on high, but hopefully scooting it up from the bottom. And then the third point I want to make, which is almost so obvious since we're all tweeting and taking our notes on our iPads, and I'm still using these, that we have a whole new generation that has brought to us technology that is transforming the way we're doing philanthropy as a tool, as a way to change the world, and not just in giving money. And we know it happened because, in part, the millennials were the first generation that were the digital natives and had the internet. But more than 10 years ago, when I wrote The Giving Family, it didn't mention social media. It didn't mention a whole lot. I mean, the internet was in there, but there was a whole lot that was not covered because so much has changed just in 2 years. I mean, look at all the nonprofits who are suddenly like, holy cow, we've got to be able to be on our mobile devices because now today's younger generation, Generation Z, aren't even using computers anymore. They're only using their mobile phones. So this is just going at light speed. And I think we see wonderful things that are happening as kids use social media to get information, to connect with people who care about their issues, to take action, and to see the results. And we can learn from that, and I'm trying really hard to learn from that. But underneath all of that, hopefully, is the values that they got from their families that said why they wanted to change the world. So that's where I'm going to stop.
I'm a big fan of taking away tools you can take home, and so this is a tip I hadn't heard. Literally writing it in stone.
Well, you could do that too. I'm thinking about that myself, actually.
So I know that we would all love to know more about what you're discovering in the use of technology. So we can have questions about that, but also a person who's really equipped to talk about that is Emily Davis. Oh. So Emily, tell us your relationship to this topic of transferring values and what you've learned through your research for your book.
Sure. So a little bit of background on me that I think is helpful is that my story is that I grew up in a very philanthropic family, but starting out with time. Time was philanthropy, right? And so, which we know is very typical of next generation. When I say next generation, I mean Generation X and Y. We don't have enough information about Gen Z yet to be saying much of anything. And as time went on, I became aware of our family's philanthropy, the fund we had, smaller dollars compared to a lot of people, but impactful dollars. And in that space, I had grown up volunteering, knew that I wanted to be in the nonprofit field, and was always in the philanthropic field in some way. So I've reflectively realized that I'm one of these younger folks who's always straddled the fence between nonprofit professionalism and philanthropy, and it's a very unique place to be. I was also, I think some other people might relate to this, the gunner, the person in the front always raising my hand and asking questions and being like, what about this? And I want to know about that. And why can't I be at the front of the room? I'm 22, I'm excited, I'm ready to go. And I started to feel, early on, really felt that age inclusivity issue. And that goes across the board, younger to older, older to younger, absolutely. And so in typical Emily Davis fashion, I don't just ask a question. I, for some reason, think I have to conduct original research on it. I'm trying to learn to stop doing that, let others do it. So in graduate school, did research on multi-generational leadership in nonprofits, and then started talking more in the philanthropic world and talking and got engaged. And Katherine reminded me that we met at 2164, where we went through training on multi-generational family philanthropy. And in fact, Michael, I'm totally calling you out. Michael Moody is a pro on this. And 2164 and the Johnson Center are coming out with a report today, which I am just drooling to see. Yeah, exactly. So I was learning about family philanthropy for myself personally, and much like I learned about nonprofit leadership for myself, I always think, oh my gosh, these are such great resources, I want more people to know about it. So fast forward, got asked to write a book on fundraising with and from the next generation of philanthropists. And in a lot of ways, it could give sort of an inside perspective from a young philanthropist perspective and a nonprofit fundraising perspective simultaneously. At least that was the goal. And to say this, I sort of jokingly say that this book is actually written about me. It's, if you want to fundraise for me, here are some ways to do it, right? It just, not that I can represent an entire generation, but I can do my best. And I am a cusper. So I'm born in the Gen X era, but I have Gen Y qualities, and yes, that's a term, is cusper. And in that space, I learned a lot about technology and using social media, because it's almost never happens that I'm asked to speak at a conference or a business journal or something, and they say, we'd love for you to talk about the next generation of philanthropists. And of course, we have to talk about social media. I'm like, yeah. So here's the deal, is I was a late adopter to using digital communications. My mom was using the internet and email before I did. I did not understand it. I was like, how does this work? Where does this email thing go? So it's to say that I learned about how to use social media as tools in your toolbox to connect and communicate with people, whether it's within philanthropy or on the fundraising side, right? And so a lot of that is, it's talking about, in terms of transmitting values, it's also being open to the conversation. To me, that's the biggest step, especially with communications, is I've sat with boards where I do board governance training, or family foundations where, and they'll have board members or young family members who are tweeting about the meeting while the meeting's going on. And you have sort of senior folks in the organization going, why would you ever do that? That's so inappropriate, right? But it's because Gen X, more so Gen Y, our millennials are such digital natives, they don't think so much about it, which actually is, in my opinion, is creating so much transparency in philanthropy. I don't know if any of you know Mary Galletti, but she rocks my Facebook world.
Mentioned you today.
Yeah. But she's really transparent about philanthropy in a way that we've never been able to be before because of social media. Now, that also means that brings up some privacy issues, and what are the values in your family? What is private and what is open? And I actually think the use of online technology is a great place to start that conversation, and a great place to know that we don't, sometimes, whether we're in philanthropy or not, we don't know what we don't know. Right? So I'll go into social media training and people think they're going to learn all the ifs, ands, and buts about running a Facebook page, when it's actually about strategy and understanding the purpose, right? And I think it's a nice metaphor for what is the purpose of our having a family foundation, right? How do we use these tools? What are our larger goals? Things like that. So in some ways, that's really helpful. Now, to a little wrap up about my stories, our family realized that our values around philanthropy is we are passionate about similar fields and topics, but we do philanthropy very different. And so my family is sunsetting their fund, and I'm starting my own. So it's just to say that we have to remember that transferring of values, and again, is both time and money. And I think there's like a whole chapter, it's not a huge chapter, but there's a whole chapter on my book about time and philanthropy. The next generations want to engage really personally. They really want to see the impact as much as humanly possible, right? They want, and here's the biggest thing, they want to know why. And I think of it as being a 2-year-old. Well, why do we do that? Why? And I've been in family foundation meetings where they're like, stop asking the damn question, why? But that's how you get clarity amongst all these other tools that these folks will talk about that is really helpful in moving both impact forward for the projects we collaborate on, but also providing value within that process. And so I'm happy to talk more about social media, but I also am like, can't wait to hear from. But may I say, this is a rockstar group, and I am so honored to be part of it. So thank you.
So one of the features that's quite obvious is that social media and the use of technology is a really fascinating feature of the next generation. And we couldn't believe that at the very same time as our session, there is the social media, social impact, and gaming session. Mm-hmm. We joked about taking a field trip. So, but
Thank you for being here.
One of the other features of the next generation's philanthropy that differs somewhat from previous generations is that they're starting younger and they want to work collaboratively with their peers. And so a perfect example of that is Lana Volftsun. And I'd love for you to share your story of how you became involved in giving and your work with the 1% Foundation.
Thanks. Is mine on? Can you hear me? All right. So my story starts when I was 12. So like our wonderful moderator, we're sort of proof of concept that transferring values can work. So I'm Jewish from Washington, D.C. When I was 12, I had my bat mitzvah, which is basically a big coming-of-age ceremony. My mom told me that I had to give away all the money I received for my bat mitzvah. And I was just devastated, like totally devastated. And I may have said, like terrible things to my mother, who I love. Anyways, and I was pretty upset about it. The first time I ever had like money of my own, granted it was a few $100s. But what I ended up doing was I convinced 15 of my friends to do it with me. And I basically created my first giving circle. So we all got together, we pooled our money, and we went around DC and we visited a bunch of different nonprofits. And I have to tell you, everything in my life changed. Like the bubble that I was living in just exploded in my face. And I had no idea that there were issues in the world. There are kids in my school who were abused at home, people in my community that couldn't afford food, were homeless, environment, health, I mean, you name it. And as a 12-year-old, the biggest concern on my mind was if this boy was going to text me, right? So everything just changed for me. And there was another thing. It wasn't just that there are issues in the world, but it was that I could actually help. Like I, 12-year-old Lana, can actually make a difference. And that's when everything changed. So we pooled our money together. We gave away $15,000. An amazing local philanthropist matched the money that we contributed. And since I was 12, I've been a philanthropist, calling myself a philanthropist and giving money away every year. And it was percentage of my allowance, not a lot of money, but it was really, really important to me. And that was the way that my parents transferred values. And of course, leading by example. But basically, the way my story progresses is, this was a very personal thing for me, almost like what made me feel Jewish, like giving, helping people, in Jewish and non-Jewish causes. And so I went to college. None of my friends were involved in philanthropy, and I just figured they didn't have money. Graduated college, got a really great corporate job in DC, making way too much money, with the most amazing, intelligent colleagues, all of whom were civically engaged, generous, committed, educated adults, and they still weren't involved in philanthropy. And I just couldn't understand why. Like, they really care about creating a better world, but they weren't doing anything about it. So I became obsessed with figuring out why. You know, like, these aren't bad people, they're amazing people, why aren't they doing anything? And basically what I discovered was there's 3 key barriers to millennial giving. So the first is affordability. Young people often feel like they just can't afford to give. Maybe they're paying bills for the first time, maybe they have student loans, but you know, philanthropy feels like something for an older group or even for a retired group, right? Not something that, you know, we can get involved in. The second is knowledge. If young adults feel like they can give, where do they give? There's over 1 million nonprofits in the US. That's like a really daunting task to figure out. How do I assess an organization? How do I give my money away in a thoughtful way? How do I know that they're going to do good work with the money that I give them? And the third is impact. Let's say I do know a really great organization. What is my $500 going to do? It's not even going to make a difference. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard young people say that, right? So one day when I'm a millionaire, then I'll get involved in philanthropy. So I went back to the giving circle model. So, you know, on the sideline, I'm really involved in my family's foundation. I'm a trustee, so I've been involved from that aspect with my family. Also involved in a giving circle called Slingshot. They publish a guide every year of the 50 most innovative Jewish nonprofits serving North America, and we have a fund of young adults in our 20s and 30s who evaluate all 50 organizations in the guide, and we give out $10,000, $40,000 grants every year, and it's also a giving circle. So giving circles is sort of stuck with me, a way to pool our money together and make a greater impact collectively, and it's also a learning process. It's one thing to, you know, transmit values through a family, but sometimes to figure out my own identity, I needed to be with a peer group. I needed to figure it out on my own so I could go to my family's philanthropy with my own set of values and my own opinions, not just, you know, repeating what my parents taught me, who I love and respect and believe that, but, you know, having a separate space to figure out my own giving identity and come and actually contribute to my family's table. So what I ended up doing was quitting my corporate job, moving to San Francisco, and now I run a nonprofit called the 1% Foundation. And we are a national community of millennials who commit at least 1% of their income to philanthropy. And we host giving circles online where they pool their funds and decide collaboratively where to give. And all this is, you know, super high tech online, connected with Facebook. And we're, you know, reached over 7,000 young adults in 8 cities. We've given, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars away, and these are adults who are medium to low income who are giving 10 to 100 bucks a month. People who've never given before, and we're teaching them how to assess organizations, how to talk to their friends about it, how to find their passion, and they get to vote online and give their money away. And what's happening is I'm seeing that young adults are having, you know, some sort of transformative experience during the grant making process, and then they graduate from our programs and they do their own individual giving. It's almost like the collective giving has given them a space to learn, to bring their friends in, to have fun, and then train them to go out and learn what a 990 is, learn how to do their due diligence, how to do a site visit or a phone call, and that they're, you know, even if they're only giving a few $100, that they have the right to do that. So that's what I'm doing, and what's really exciting is in March we're launching a new website, a giving circle platform where anyone will be able to go online and start their own giving circle, invite their friends. So this is for companies, organizations, foundations, individuals, cause-based, city-based, whatever it is. So we're basically building in the tools and the educational resources so that anyone can use this.
And I'm part. I love it. And it's fun.
Thank you, Lana. One of the other features of the next generation that really excites me is that philanthropy is becoming democratized. Talking about values being passed down, the values that came from my grandparents, that came from my parents, and I just have to acknowledge my mom in the audience. but the value of human dignity. And our funding is around poverty issues. The thread that's run through our family is civil and economic justice. But realizing, too, that being in the position of being a philanthropist is incredibly empowering. And it really grounds you in your own dignity. And that's something that we care about everyone having the opportunity to do. And so really grateful to the 1% Foundation for bringing that to folks. So last and certainly not least, Katherine Lorenz, I'd love for you to talk about your experience being involved in a nonprofit, what motivated you, and then the arc of your personal and professional passion for philanthropy.
Thank you, and thank you for the very generous introduction. We could be doing the exact same for you easily, so thank you. Yeah, so just a little bit about my own personal story. I grew up in Texas, and upon graduating from college, really was interested in rural health issues in Latin America, and so bounced around Latin America a little bit. Decided I wanted to live in rural poverty for a little while to understand what that was like. That led to spending a summer and then a year and then more and more in Oaxaca, Mexico, in southern Mexico, where I ended up living for almost 6 years. Started a nonprofit. I co-founded an organization working in the indigenous communities around health and agriculture, so spent a lot of time looking at and understanding rural health issues and rural economic issues as well. Through that time, I mean, I think I just grew up incredibly. Living abroad, living, surrounded by poverty all the time. Starting an organization, I was really, really intent on making it not dependent on my family and our family's philanthropy, and that was a really hard job, but I learned a lot about fundraising. I learned a lot about growing an organization. I learned about how nonprofits really work when you're working on a shoestring. And during that time, our family started to go through a strategic planning process to see where our family's foundation would go, and that was led by my aunt, who ran the foundation for 19 years. I think she started seeing there are all these people, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to make these transitions, exactly these transitions through the generations. And we had a really amazing year-long strategic planning process about how our family will do that, where this foundation will go. And through that, chose an issue area to begin with and begin learning about. So we then spent a year learning about clean energy, which was the first focal area of our first kind of family grant that we were making together. I should say this process was the first time that our generation, the third generation, was involved in any real way. So my, coming in was entirely around the strategic planning process, and kind of everyone was brought in together. In doing this work around clean energy and understanding, or learning about clean energy, understanding more about climate change, I was really seeing the parallels that was going on working with farmers, because the rainy seasons were changing, the droughts were much more severe, the floods were much more severe, they were losing crops, it was affecting their livelihood, and I started to see this real link between climate change and rural agriculture issues. And I also started to get much more interested in the kind of philanthropy side. As I was doing so much fundraising, I wanted to understand I was really trying to figure out how can we get more money for this organization. But in doing that, I took a course called the Philanthropy Workshop. It's a 3-week course in strategic philanthropy, and it just kind of blew my mind. It changed my whole world in terms of how I think about philanthropy, how I think about strategy, and in particular how I spend my own time, because what I always say is I don't actually have that much financial capital at my disposal personally for my own work, but I give my time and I give my energy. And so where could I best spend my energy? And they then hired me actually to come run the Institute for Philanthropy's New York office and run the Philanthropy Workshop in North America for 2.5 years. And so I left Mexico. The organization is still intact. I'm still on the board and love being a part of that still. And went to work for the Institute for Philanthropy, where I got to know many other families doing philanthropy together, understanding their stories, understanding their issues, understanding how they can have impact. Kind of teaching and learning together, I would say, was a big part of what I was doing, and seeing how that really compared to what was going on in my own family. And it was a really interesting way to learn about, both what other families are doing, how that can apply to our family. And so about 2.5 years after being in that role, my aunt, who I said ran the foundation for 19 years, decided when she turned 65 she'd step down, and we had an election, and I was voted president. And so I've been in this role almost 2 years. And to say a little bit about our foundation, my grandfather's 93. He has 10 children and 23 grandchildren. And I should point out that my aunt and uncle, Grant and Tiziana, are in the crowd, and Grant is vice president of the foundation. And if it weren't for him, I probably would have jumped off a cliff about daily for the last 2 years. So we've got a big family, a lot of voices, a lot of passions, a lot of ideas about how this goes forward. And upon my grandfather's passing, it will scale pretty significantly overnight. So I really see my role as exactly this, bringing the values of my grandparents and our family together, trying to really make sure that our foundation reflects those values, reflects that legacy in a way that we're all proud of and excited about, and that we can all work together to do philanthropy well. And I look at that as having kind of two, doing it well. What does that mean? I think of that as doing it well for our family, that it's actually a good impact and a positive thing that we are doing as a family for us. And also impact in the world. How do we make sure that we're having the biggest bang for our buck? How are we really being strategic and leveraging our resources and having an impact in the world? And sometimes those two can be at odds, and how do we navigate that and navigate what we're giving to, especially with so many people. So I really am kind of living this role right now, and as kind of passing these values down through the generation, trying to bring in younger family members a little bit. I hope to do more of that in the future. And spending time with my grandfather while he's still with us to talk about what is it that he wants, and how do we make sure that we have some guidance for when he's no longer here.
And didn't you spend about 3 months just to be with him and absorb his...
Probably first 3 to 4 months I spent most of the time in Houston. I tried to have dinner with him probably 3 times a week during that time, really listening, getting to know him, which was really fun. I mean, I hadn't done that very much. Really understanding where he comes from, what he wants. It was a really nice time. So yeah.
So I started out the beginning of the session just asking you to think about what your burning questions are, because we do have this panel together for about the next 20, 25 minutes. So I open it up to you for questions or comments. And Mom.
I don't need to introduce myself. But I had a question about the use of tweeting in a board meeting. And I have 10 grandchildren, and I understand that they're always doing this. But I have a question about the confidentiality that trustees can expect in a board meeting, and the sensitivities that, including the emotional sensitivities that many of them have around the discussions, and their expectation that what goes on in those board meetings will be confidential. So could you address that?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on it, so.
Go for it.
Okay. Representing social media in chair number 2. It's a great question, and I think it comes up in just about any board or confidential space. So I'm glad to expand on it a little bit more. I think it's simply defining what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, right? And so, for example, when I go to a conference, so I live tweet and blog from a lot of conferences, and if there's a hashtag in the program, like there is in today's program.
They all knew that.
They all knew that. You all knew that. I know it's okay to tweet, right? And that's stuff that I've learned. But I sit on the board of Social Venture Partners in Boulder, and I checked with the executive director and said, I really can't imagine tweeting during a board meeting because I'm doing other stuff, but I want to know explicitly do we have an internal policy about the use of social media and the use of social media by staff, by volunteers, by board members, and what does that look like? And most people, at a nonprofit level, certainly may be different than a family conversation. But at the very least to say, what happens in this room stays in this room, right? We don't think it's appropriate at this point in the meeting or the entire meeting for anybody to be sharing public information or private information over sort of public airwaves, right? One of the things that is slightly different is that, so for example, I'm going to use Mary again because I love Mary. Mary Galletti, she will not tweet what's happening in a board meeting, but she'll share on Facebook that she's going to a board meeting and that she's excited to be part of the foundation. And so she's promoting the fact that she's philanthropically engaged in what her family is doing or what project she's working on. All of that's to say is that everybody's different, right? But to be explicit in saying this is appropriate, this is not appropriate, and that you cover that, I don't know if you have an orientation or at the start of every meeting you say that this is appropriate or it's not. We need to have, and it's to explain why. It's important for us to have a safe space, to have confidential conversations,
Great.
If I could just add to that and make not just specifically tweeting at board meetings, but kind of more broadly about where do you want to be as a family? Do you want to be anonymous? Do you want to be out leading the charge and talking about your philanthropy somewhere in the middle? I think these are conversations that families often struggle with, including our own. I mean, whether it's generational or just style, I mean, how do you want to be perceived in the community, what you're comfortable with? I think in particular for younger people, when you turn 23 and you're looking for your first job out of college and you Google your family and you see millions of dollars come up, it's very confusing. And that didn't happen when I was 23. I'm 34. So, I mean, even 10, 12 years ago, that wasn't the case. I moved to Mexico anonymously. Many people have no idea that my family has wealth, who I'm still friends with and I go visit all the time. If I were to move to Mexico now, would it be safe? I mean, these are real questions that I think families really need to think about, and it goes much farther than I think just specifically what's going on right this minute in the board meeting, but like how open do you want to be, and how does it impact the actual impact you can have as a foundation or not?
Margot?
How do you know that people are tweeting and not just answering their emails and texting their friends? I mean, that's why I think it's really
You don't.
So
now that's
how do you know that they're engaged in what people are talking about and not just clicking out and doing their own?
I tend to give a test at the end of every meeting. What was the answer to this? No, what were you gonna respond?
Yeah, I was just going to add, so, my family is very anonymous with their giving, so, and that is clear from the beginning. My parents are, Russian immigrants, and, you don't talk about money and you don't share any of that, right? Like, they don't even want me to tag them in a photo on Facebook, like, of our family. That's how, like, Russian they are. Okay, so, so like, that, and that expectation is set in advance. I think that's really important. I don't think it's uncalled for, beginning of a board meeting or, a family dinner, leave your cell phones at the door. Yeah. And I do this, like I have Shabbat dinners in my apartment once a month, and, I invite my friends, and if you come to my Shabbat dinner, shoes off, cell phones at the door. That's it.
Totally fine.
I mean, like if there's something going on or whatever, really easy, but let's actually connect. And I think you can do that with your teens. I think setting expectations in advance is really important, but I think tweeting and Facebooking and texting is really important, especially to teenagers. So Susan and I are involved in a group called Youth Philanthropy Connect, and it's an annual conference held at Disneyland. We've both been speakers at it, and they bring 8 to 16-year-olds, I think, or 8 to 18-year-olds from different family foundations or youth philanthropy groups together, and it's actually planned and run by the teens or the kids. And one thing I noticed, I've been sort of watching, they all had me on Facebook, and I've been watching their social media, and I don't see them tweeting about the assets of their family's foundation, but they are tweeting about the volunteer trip they just went on, their new favorite nonprofit, sharing that kind of stuff, and that's really great. So not only, you want them to tweet about that stuff, in the board meeting, they learn about this amazing organization, you watch a little video, and then they go and they share it with all their friends. That's awesome. I think it's just about being really clear that you want them to get excited about the work and to share it with their friends, but that there are certain boundaries and just being super clear about them.
Yeah, and I would say to your point as well, I mean, to answer your question, you don't know. And let me just say that I am the person in the room who always has my iPad or my computer or my phone, and I've had a lot of people assume that I'm working the whole time, but I use Evernote to take all my notes, and I have it all in one place. I'm a tactile and visual learner. So for me, I need sort of as many senses activating as possible for me to retain the information. So it's actually, for me, it's not about being rude or disrespectful. It's actually me being engaged. And I'm not gonna lie, I check an email here and there, and you know what? It's fine, but I'm there in the room. I'm able, and it's interesting because I actually, board meetings that I attend, I will tell people, just so you know, I'm taking notes, I'm present, I'm here, but this is how I retain information. So I think the question can shift a little bit to, is that helpful for you is that helpful for you in terms of engagement? And that's what I mean by opening up the conversation and just being aware that we have, it might not be generational. It might be that now the platform is available for people who learn in different ways, or you're in a different life. I mean, one of the big questions I always ask, is it generational or is it life stage that makes things different? And it's a little bit of all of it, right? And that there's this idea that we need to try to work, and I think this is extremely hard in families, is move slightly away from top down to side by side, wherever we can.
And on that same point, I don't think we should lay this rap on just the teenagers. Because at the Youth Philanthropy Conference, when I did a session with the adults, because obviously parents come along with their next gen boards, and I did a session with adults, and I was warned ahead of time, one of the donors, I will not mention the name, was going to be on his cell phone a lot. And so I had already heard from the kids and seen in their room their chart of the rules for their meeting, their engagement. And one of them was no cell phones during the meeting. So I went into the room and I said, just want to let you know the kids have decided no cell phones in their room, so I think we should probably try to honor that throughout the conference. And it was like, oh my gosh, that poor guy had to leave like 12 times. I know he's running a business, but I mean, he could not stop with the BlackBerry. So it's not just kids.
So, Cara.
I don't quite agree with the question, but, and this might be for you because you have such a large family, recognizing that most family foundations have a very defined amount of money to give, and you want to be impactful in your giving, which oftentimes translates to larger gifts sometimes. How do you navigate wanting to be inclusive and translating the values among generations, which I feel like requires that they have a say and be engaged in the giving, but at the same time recognizing you have a core mission that you have to abide by in order to do your work? How do you include everyone where they feel like they've been part of the giving, even if it's, for example, not a subject that they're wild about? Okay. How do you handle that with the size board you have?
No, I mean, I think that is the question in family philanthropy. And in my opinion, you choose, does the family come first or does the impact come first? That's not to say that the family can't be excited and involved in impactful philanthropy, or that, you know, family philanthropy automatically is going to be zero impact. But you have to decide when you're coming to a point where, you know, you have to make a decision. Do you care if Aunt Sally is upset? Or do you care if the grant isn't so impactful? And what I think works best is where you make a division and you say X% or X budget is really about the programs and the impact, and this percentage is discretionary funding, or however you want to do it. I think every family should have discretionary funding, even if it's small. I mean, it gives people a way to be excited about something they're excited about, and they don't have to be excited about what the foundation's about. But I think you need to be explicit, because the problems you get into are about the fights about, I like this organization, well, your values are terrible. I mean, that's essentially what you say. Like, I don't like that organization. You're saying often, or it's heard, is your values are bad. And it can become a place where kind of family discord plays out over the boardroom table, which I think is not the point.
I would just add on discretionary grants that it happens sometimes that they end up being like our little personal checkbooks. And so if the discretionary grants are allowed, sometimes it's better if they can be sort of another way that people can do some more collective giving, or at least focus on a mission or whatever. I mean, there's some great papers that have been written on ways to design a discretionary grant program that does what you're talking about, gives those folks who have some other issues that they want to fund some outlet. And then the other bottom line is, we all have our personal checkbooks, and it's the foundation, and as you said, Catherine, the good of the community and the public trust that you serve because you got a tax deduction, as opposed to my personal pleasure in giving to my favorite organization.
And actually, a quote I heard actually from Ginny Esposito at the National Center, maybe you came up with it, is you have to decide, does the family serve the foundation or does the foundation serve the family? And when you decide that, that might help guide you. I mean, I would argue the family should serve the foundation, and if you want your own personal checkbook, you've got one. But, you know.
I think Ginny would add, it actually is, it's helpful that it serves both,
Yeah.
but it should not, it should not imperil the family or imperil the giving that you get out of balance.
So we have some questions on this side of the room. We'll start with Scott.
Mine is about the notion of, well, this is called transmitting values to the next generation. If you do a good job of transmitting values to the next generation, and keep it within the family and family foundation, which is what I have, do you really need to have a mission? Or haven't you, if you invest in the next generation sufficiently, training them and educating them, bringing them along, allow them to freedom to decide what to do? I mean, in certain cases you have, in my case, I'm a fourth generation member of one foundation, but I've started my own. And the thing that I didn't like about being the fourth generation one is it had a mission, but 4 generations later, it was too narrowly focused and irrelevant to all of us. None of them live in the geographic region that the mission restricts us to. So therefore, intentionally, we're doing one that has nothing to do with anything. It's like we train the next generation, they come on, it's theirs, they can do whatever they want. Because we're trying to transmit value to them, not a mission.
I think it helps not to have a mission to be too narrowly defined. But for the good of the goal you're trying to accomplish, it's good to have a mission just because then you're going to stick on track. So if the mission is we're going to try to improve the educational outcomes of kids in, the world, I mean, you can still find a lot of common ground and a lot of freedom within that. And of course, subsequent boards can always change the mission. But if you don't have at least some mission, then it's kind of hard to achieve what you want in terms of your goals.
Robin?
I have a broader question. I'm Herbalife Family Foundation, but it's not a family foundation. We actually raise money from individuals who sell Herbalife, and I find myself in a position of being in a room of teaching philanthropy, one to my donors, and now to their children. And so my donors are the top 10% earners worldwide of Herbalife, and so their children, and many of them weren't raised in philanthropic families, but their children are well off, never had a hard day in their life, and are now in a position and will be in a position to inherit the wealth of their parents. So, given that stage, what are the key elements? What are some of the key points you would get across if you had, 30 of them in a room to say, okay, this is philanthropy, and this is what we should start thinking about, and this is how we might want to be engaged?
I would first say they need to pursue their own passion, whatever they're passionate about. I would also say
Well, they don't know what philanthropy means, and they're in a number of languages. I didn't say that either. Global.
Global.
Oh.
But still, I mean, they need to pursue what their passion is and figure out the greatest way to have impact and what they are passionate about. And that includes time and resources, and there's a lot more they bring to the table than just the money, I would say.
I think there are some really great resources out there, like 2164, values cards, Picture Your Legacy, that's the other one. I mean, I was running a teen philanthropy program in the DC area a few years ago, and we were using those cards. And that, from the most basic sense, what are your values? What do you care about? What is the change you want to see in the world? Those are things that kids and teens have amazing answers to, right? Better than a lot of the adults that I'm working with. So I think...
I'm engaged. I'm typing notes.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, Robin. You're just tweeting over there.
Yeah, that's what we want.
Well, I think some of those tools are really great. I mean, I think I love the collaborative giving thing. I think if you could give them like $5,000 or them each put in $10 or whatever it is, and actually give them some money to play with, then they get serious, right? Because you're not involved in the decision. The decision is theirs. You can even leave the room while they figure out where they want to give. Empowering them and giving them their own table, I think, is really powerful.
Things like site visits and going and getting to know the communities they're going to have an work with. I think that there's nothing more exciting or empowering than, well, maybe not empowering, but that creating passion than going and kind of visiting and getting to know, not just writing the check.
Right, and I think, to add on, and they might, next gen philanthropy, young adult, it's all defined in different ways. I will tell you, for me, as a young professional, my philanthropy was all over the frickin' place. And I knew we had money. I spent most of my time volunteering rather than giving money away. I don't think I can say enough about volunteering. I stuffed goodie bags for events when I was 7. That's how it all started. Now, I didn't know a thing about a giving plan. And I learned from Resource Generation, which is a group of young people with wealth or access to wealth who are interested in social change. I learned so much through their Make Money, Make Change conference, through the groups I was a part of. The resources were sort of endless for me. And then got involved in Emerging Practitioners on Philanthropy, Young Nonprofit Professionals Network, all this stuff because I had this world open to me of a group of peers. And I think a lot of what I'm hearing is that there's peer learning and peer access. It's really powerful. So sorry, Lisa.
Oh, no. I was going to say that we'll take the questions that we have. I just want to kind of call out the elephant in the room, having worked with a lot of families, is that there's a lot of pain and angst about fear that our kids aren't going to be engaged and that they haven't absorbed our values. And so obviously it's a little late in the session to say this, but everything that is said in this room is confidential. And if there are those issues out there and you don't feel comfortable bringing them up to the panelists or to me in the course of this session, I just want to say that I'm a resource to you outside of this session, as I know these folks are too. We had a question here. In the blue? Oh, thank you.
For Katherine, you have a large family, and how are all the members of the family members of your board? As chair of the board, what is an effective working board size? Or do you just include all family members? How will you handle it?
Actually, as a part of the strategic planning process, I mentioned we then had a kind of governance committee where we decided some of these things. So in our bylaws, we have 12 board members. We invite everyone over 25 lineal descendants, so not spouses, to participate in the kind of meeting part of the board meeting. So there are 19 of us right now, but 3 more turn 25 this year. So next year there'll be 3 extras, 3 added. We've started to invite spouses to the programmatic work so that they can kind of get excited about what we're doing, but not when we're starting to talk about budgets and that sorts of stuff. What's one of the things I've done since I've been in this role is start to really try to get the program committees up and running. So we have 4 different programs that have committees that meet regularly, mostly quarterly, and trying to have a lot of the stuff happen out in committees that then kind of comes and reports back to the board because we only meet once a year. I mean, the perfect size for a board, I serve on a lot of boards. I'd say 10 is a great size from the boards I serve on, kind of 8 to 10. Yeah. Family boards are different. I mean, I think, well, you can't help how many people are in your family. So, you kind of go with what you go. I will say including spouses, I think, is incredibly important and something that not all families do. Whether you include them as complete equals or non-voting members or something, but to have them kind of sit outside while the family's in their meeting can be really hard in kind of nuclear family units. So, but there's a lot of information on different ways to do it. I think it's about looking at the ways different families do it and applying it to what feels best for your family.
So, Pamela.
Yes, I wanted to go back about this question of the mission and changing the mission. Mm-hmm. And Liz, I'd be interested to know your foundation's now in your 4th generation. And has there been an evolution of the mission?
Right. That's a great question. So we established a mission when my mom took over the foundation, and her generation looked at kind of where there was a business presence, and we focused on 3 neighborhoods around poverty issues, children and families living in poverty. That's an issue that has appeal to all generations. So we haven't had the situation where it's so much a generational issue that the others don't get involved. However, we're very geographically dispersed. And one of the reasons I'm so interested in the next generation is because they're teaching us one of my favorite quotes is this one from Buckminster Fuller, and he says, "Children are our elders in universe time, for they're born into a world more evolved than we can know, and we can only glimpse it through their eyes." And what I see, what I glimpse through the next generation is that they're giving at a much younger age, and the world is their backyard in a way that was never the case for my generation. So they have their own grant-making pot that's small, and they decided collectively as a group, and we did the same thing, just in a room, no adult is running this meeting. You guys pick somebody to run your meeting. And boy, that gave them the opportunity to step into their leadership. And they decided amongst themselves, and there's 20 of them, that they wouldn't give in their own regions, but they wanted to give globally because they wanted to have more impact. So that is something that the junior board has defined for themselves. Now, our mission hasn't changed, but the opportunity for the junior board has, and they've seized it. Will our mission change going forward has yet to be seen. That there may come a day when that's the case, because we are very geographically dispersed, and many of the board and junior board do not live in Los Angeles. So we shall see. Okay, I think there was, Sharon, did you have a question?
It's really not a question. Just one thing that we do, we work with a lot of families, and I work in San Diego at the Jewish Community Foundation, and this is very minor compared to what we're talking about, but one thing we do, which has worked great, is we have values and interests surveys that we do online with families through a Survey Monkey. It's super easy to administer, and the families just love it. And so I know you're talking about a lot of resources, but it's been our go-to, and it's diffused a lot of these kinds of issues. And then we're able just to aggregate that data by geographical area, and where we can also tweak it. If we know that there's a definite interest in the environment, and then getting much, delving deeper into issues.
But I think your point is a great one, that I know that we forget, especially, I will speak for a lot of fundraisers, I'll give you a parallel, is that I have a lot of professional fundraisers, senior fundraisers, who are saying to me, well, how do I know how to connect with Katherine or Lana or Susan or Lisa? I mean, how do I know should I use social media? Should I use email? And I'm like, how about if you ask them? So it's sort of the same thing, like, you don't know if you don't ask, right? And I think it's something that, to go back, is there's always some root pieces to identifying values, and is asking people to engage in the conversation and having that on the table, whatever format it is, which I think that's a great idea. But yeah, asking.
So just to add on to that, Sharon, and this goes to my previous comment about there being pain and angst around the family not coming around a common value or a common funding interest. I worked with a family last year where the patriarch had passed away, and there was tons of family dynamics, including a child that had been disinherited, and the widest gap in interests. One granddaughter interested in domestic animals, another one in the military, an uncle interested in the environment, and it was almost a badge of their differences that they were proud of, that they all had these very different things. And I don't know if it was cruel or comical, but when he died, he specified that he wanted the family to come around a common funding area, and that a third of the foundation funding would go to that. And so I was nearly sick to my stomach trying to thinking, I can't do that. But we used some very in-depth tools looking at values and interest areas. And when we looked at what was common in all of them, they were really shocked, as was I, happily, that there were 2 very specific things they all shared an interest in. It wasn't in their top 3 for them individually, but as a group, they were very interested in 2 things, and it shocked them. One of them was nutrition, which happened to be of great interest to the patriarch. So there was this thread, and so I think those tools and having an outside family member like you do with family, Sharon, can be really valuable in that case.
Definitely the outsider
Outsiders,
coming in to help facilitate these conversations is key.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The only experts are people from out of town.
Yeah,
Right.
There you go.
Can't be
Right.
somebody
Or
in
at
the
least
family.
out of your family, right?
Get
The
out of your
further-
family.
The further out they go, the more expertise they have.
Michael.
Yeah, so I want to ask about another way that there might be differences between generations and between family members, but in particular between generations, not simply the issues that they're interested in, but the way in which they want to engage. And we know from lots of research, including ours, that the Gen X and Gen Y, particularly Gen Y, want to be more hands-on in their engagement. They want to not just give time, but also give their talents, be more, almost like a social venture partners model, where they give their talents as well as their money, and they want to, like what Lana was saying, they want to be engaged, and they have been engaged as volunteers from very early on. So site visits and ways of working together on a project with the grantee are things that are really exciting to them, but they may not be so exciting to older generations. And I wonder, in your experience, if you've seen how to manage those different preferences for engagement of the different generations, and are there ways of encouraging people to recognize and value the engagement of the other generation, the people who have it too?
Good question. Great question.
I could say that, when a family foundation running one, there are a million jobs. There are a lot of things that have to be done. And I'm always struck by the people who get really creative about how to put people into the things that will be of greatest interest to them. So that a lot of family foundations will have a grant-making committee, and Uncle Bob doesn't want to be on that because he loves investments, so he can be on the investment committee. And if we've got the young people who really want to go out and do all the site visits, that might be what they are designated to do, and they can help with the foundation website. And the senior generation may have a lot of other interesting roles that they can play as the senior generation. I mean, National Center wrote a whole paper on all the different things that they could do, including mentoring some of the younger generation. So I think sometimes we just need to think out of the box a little bit in terms of what kinds of opportunities there are to serve the foundation, many of which are also not on the board. And that gets to the problem of you've got 10 siblings, and there are lots of ways to serve without having to be on the board. So that's a
Well,
thought.
and one of the roles that the senior generation has is the keeper of the family history.
Huge.
Absolutely.
I would encourage any of you that are working with multi-generational families to take advantage of the time you have with the senior generation to record those stories in whatever format you desire.
And for the grandparent generation to work with the grandchildren too, to help mentor them, because
Yes.
There's this generation in between that we can kind of
Yeah.
the outer edges, I think, really support each other.
So I just worked with the Family Foundation, Michael, to your point, and we went around and I asked people what their interests were at the time to start this conversation about matching skills. And one of the things also to your point is that I don't know that this group would have, I thought of you, because I didn't know that this group would have the capacity to write down or record the history of the organization. So what we did was decided they would start every board meeting and committee meeting with a mission moment. Do you guys know about mission moments? So mission moments are, I love this. So you start every board meeting, every committee meeting with a story about, a story specifically about the impact or your experience you've had in the foundation or in the family's philanthropy. And it reconnects the individual to the work that's being done and why they're doing it, but also creates an organizational history, right? And so we had at this family foundation, the matriarch, that her husband decided he no longer wanted to be involved, and she didn't really want to be involved either, but she wanted to be around enough to pass on the foundation. And so the next generation two that was there, learned all these stories from the mission moment exercise that they had never known about the start of the foundation. So it could be something as simple as starting every meeting in that way. I would also say similar to a lot, I mean, some other boards, is that you can do sort of a, what the right phrase is, family audit, right? Like at the end of the year, am I enjoying my experience on the board? Would I like to, I don't know how to say that, but like, if you have a better phrase, I'm open to it.
Don't open that can.
Okay, I'm sorry. But also to know, and this is, I think, one of, and I loved what you said, Lisa, is that I hear so many times from next-gen family foundation members or incoming foundation members that they feel like they aren't welcome on the board because there is an assumption that they don't know how to be good board members, which drives me, of course, bonkers, because I ask how many people really are professional board members, and there really aren't that many, right? Like, I went through a whole boards first training really selfishly because I want to know how to be a great board member. So it means not only sharing sort of down, but up. So the mentoring piece to me looks more like coaching and side by side. Additionally, I would add on that, you know, we didn't have professional or academic programs around nonprofit management and philanthropy, and we do now, which means that these conversations continue to evolve. And opening up professional development opportunities to your family foundation members, younger or older, and saying, look at all the things that we've learned in the world of philanthropy, that they're actually academic. So knowing that there are a lot of resources out there and exposing those opportunities. So for example, I may not know anything about investments, but heck, I'd like to learn. So can I join Uncle George on the investment committee and learn about that?
So I think that we're probably going to have to wrap it
Sorry.
up and
Yeah,
go to lunch. But I think we can stay up here for a couple more minutes if there were questions that didn't get answered. And join me in thanking this incredible panel.